There's lots of ORMs out there, but when it comes to TypeScript and Postgres, my go-to has been Prisma, but this new one popped onto my radar recently called Drizzle, and I want to check it out, so that's what we'll do in this video. Obviously, we need a goal for the video, not just reading through the documentation, so we'll build a small API that handles a few CRUD operations for a blogging application. This is basically what we did in the bun videos, but instead of Prisma, we'll just use Drizzle. Digging through the documentation, it looks like their main selling point is being lightweight and performant, but what I found really interesting is the approach that they've taken with the queries. If you've never used an ORM before, or you know SQL, then you wouldn't find it too bad picking up Drizzle because of how it imitates SQL. In this case, if you just want to select all rows from a table, you just do a db select from and the table, which is just like SQL. It obviously has a bit more of a modern touch to it, using models and preventing things like SQL injections for you. But one of the reasons ORMs can be intimidating at first to pick up is because of the new querying structure that you have to learn and get used to. If you're already familiar with that structure, then it looks like Drizzle also supports that with their queries API. This can simplify complex queries a lot, especially when you have lots of joins happening. So in this case, for example, on the users table, we're doing a find many and also including all the posts. To get started with this video, we'll actually use a template that I created a few days ago. This template just provides us with a Postgres database and an Express server. I'll leave the link to this template in the description if you want to follow along. But if we take a quick look at what's happening in this repo, we'll have a Docker file. This Docker file is just strictly responsible for creating our server and running it in the container. And then we also have a Docker compose. In here, we just create our database. It's a Postgres database using the latest image, and then our server, which gets built from the Docker file. Next, we have our package.json, and here we just install cores.env, express, and Morgan. If you've never used Morgan before, it basically just outputs all the requests that our API receives in the console for us, just to have that visibility into what's going on. And yeah, lastly, we just have our index.ts in which we just create our Express server. And for now, we just have one endpoint which just returns hello world. To get started, make sure you run npm install. This will just make sure that all of our packages are installed. And now we can go ahead and install our Drizzle packages and the rest of the packages that we'll need. So we'll just do npm install Drizzle ORM. This is the ORM itself. Then we'll do Drizzle Zod and PG. Drizzle Zod will just be for validation on our requests coming in, and PG will just allow us to connect to the database. Once those packages are installed, we can go ahead and install a few other dev packages. These are just specific for our development environment. So we'll do npm i-D, and we'll install Drizzle Kit. And we'll look at what that does in a second. And then tsx, we'll just use this to run some scripts, and then @types/pg. Now that we have all of our packages installed, let's close our terminal and go into our package.json. And here we'll have to make some changes. So for our dev environment, since our index file is in the source folder, we'll have to do source/index. Start and build can be left alone, but we'll need a few more commands. So we'll do introspect. The goal of introspect is if we already have a database, it will pull all of our tables into a migration, so then we have that tracked into a file. We won't need this for the video, but it's still good to know about it. And to call this, we'll just use Drizzle Kit, introspect, PG, and we'll pass it a config, which will just be drizzle.config.ts. We can do the same thing for the generate command, but instead of introspect here, we'll just pass generate. What generate does is it actually creates the migrations for us. So it'll look at our models and check for changes and then create our migrations for us. Next, we actually need our migration script. So we'll call this migrate. And in order to call this, we'll just do tsx-r.env/config. And then we need our migration script. So we'll put this in source/db/migrate.ts. And lastly, one cool feature of Drizzle is that it provides us with a studio. This is just so we can see our database, and we'll just call this studio. And this is also from Drizzle Kit, so we'll call Drizzle Kit studio. Now that we're done with our package.json, you notice that in here we're calling .env, so let's just create a quick .env file, so I'll call it .env. And there's a few values that we need in here, so I'll just copy and paste them. It's pretty straightforward. We need a port for our server, the name for the database, the host for the database, our user, password, and putting all of that together into a URL, but that's basically our .env file. Next, in our package.json, we also specified a drizzle.config, so we'll just create that file next. So I'll just copy and paste this and create a new file. In here, we need to import .env, so we'll do .env/config. Next, we need to import a type, so we'll do import type config, which comes from Drizzle Kit. And we need to export a default object from here, so we'll do export default an object, and we'll also type this as satisfies config. We'll export a few properties in this object, such as schema. We don't have a schema file just yet, but we'll still provide the path. So we'll put this in .source/db/schema/index.ts. We need a folder in which Drizzle will export all of our migrations and all the files that it generates. So we'll do out and the same thing, ./source/db, and we'll call this Drizzle. For the driver, since we're using Postgres, we'll just do PG. And we can also have DB credentials, and in here we'll pass a connection string, and we'll make sure this is a string, which comes from process.env.db_URL. Also, I want to make sure this is verbose, so we'll pass this as true, and also strict, which is also true. So we're done with our Drizzle config now. Let's actually work on the schema files. So we'll go ahead and create those folders. In here, we need a new folder called DB and another folder called schema, in which we just create a index.ts. The schema, just like Prisma, if you're familiar with that, this is where all of our models are going to live. So we can export const. Since this is a blogging application, we'll have a posts table. And in order to create this, we need to call PG table. This comes from the Drizzle ORM PG core. So we'll import that and the name of the table, which will be posts. And in the second parameter, we can provide an object with all the fields that we want on this table. So we'll say our table will have an ID, and I want this to be a UUID. So I'll just type UUID, and this also comes from PG core. We'll call this ID, and the default for this will just be default random. And this is the primary key. I want our posts to also have a title, so we'll do title. This is a varchar, also from PG core. Give it the name title. I will actually cap this to a length of 256, so we'll do length 256. And we don't want this column to be null, so we'll just do not null. Next, we have our content, which just like the title will be a varchar with the length of 256, and we cannot make this null. So all we have to do is just rename this to content. And lastly, for this table, I just want to create it at, which is a timestamp, and also from PG core. Created at, which defaults to now, and it is also not null. The one thing I've noticed about Drizzle is they don't yet support updated at, so we'll have to leave that column for now. Next, let's just export some types for our model. So we'll do export type, post, and we can infer the select model type, which also comes from Drizzle ORM. And in here, we just provide posts. Actually, we have to do type of posts. And now we have our model, which is just a post containing all the fields that we specified in our table. We can do the same thing for a new model. So I'll do export type new post. And this uses infer insert model, which is also from the Drizzle ORM, and type of posts. And you would just simply use this whenever you create a new post, and this in most other scenarios. Next, let's actually create our database connection by just creating an index file in the DB folder. So we'll just do index.ts. In order to do that, we'll just have to import pool, and this comes from PG. And we'll also have to import node PG database. This comes from node Postgres, and we also need to import Drizzle. Next, let's also import our schema. So we'll do star as schema from .schema. We'll throw a check in here just to make sure we have all of our values for connecting to the database, if not throwing an error. But otherwise, we can create our pool. So we'll do const pool, and this equals to new pool. And in here for the port, we'll just do 5432, which is the default port usually. And the rest are just the process.env values that we saved in our .env file. Next, we actually have to export our database. So we'll do export const db. And this is a node Postgres database with the type of schema. And this is equal to Drizzle, where we pass in the pool and the schema. And that's it. Now we have our database connection set up. We just have to import this wherever we want to use our database. But next, let's actually look at how to create our migration script. So we'll also create this in here. So we'll do new file migrate.ts. We'll do the same thing in here. So we'll import pool, and we'll also import migrate. You'll see here a lot of suggestions. I'll just type it out. So we'll do from Drizzle ORM / node Postgres / migrator. Next, we also want to import node PG database and Drizzle. We'll create a function in here, and it needs to be async. So we'll do async function main, and underneath it, we'll just call main. This is because we can't await things inside of the file without actually calling them inside of an async function. So we'll have to wrap everything inside of this function. And in here we can create our pool. So we'll do pool is equal to new pool. But this time let's just pass the connection string. So we'll do connection string process.env.db URL. For the database, it's the same thing, const db node Postgres database is equal to Drizzle and pass in the pool. Next, we can actually log out that our migrations are running, and then we can do an await for migrate, which is actually going to run our migrations, provided the database connection. And next, we just need to provide the migrations folder, which, as we specified before, is just source/db/drizzle. Next, we can also console log that the migrations have ran. And after this, we can await pool.end, and this will exit the function for us. I think our app is at a good point right now, so we can actually test some things. I have a configuration set up for running my Docker Compose, but we'll do this simply from the terminal for now. So if I clear this, we should be able to just do Docker Compose up, and we'll also build the images. You don't have to specify that flag, but I think I've built them before, so I just want to make sure everything is brand new. Now that everything is running, you should be seeing the message server listening on port. And to quickly test this, I created a tester.http, and we can run this. Once we run this, we can actually see the message hello world, which just means that our server is running properly. I can also see in here that my Docker is running with the containers, so I can see that my database and my server are running, which just means we should be able to run our generate and migrate scripts. So I'll create another terminal in here, and we can do npm run generate. As you can see, this created a migration file for us, and we can even see it in here. So source database, and we now have the Drizzle folder with the SQL migration that it created. So you can see it's creating the table if it doesn't exist with the columns that we specified. Next in here, we actually want to apply this migration to our database. So we'll just do npm run migrate. We see our console logs, and it's saying that all migrations have been ran. And if we do npm run studio, this will run that Drizzle Studio that I was talking about. And if we go to this URL that it provided for us, now we're inside of the studio, and I can select all the tables that I want to show up in my tabs. So I'll select posts, and then we can even click into posts. And this is the cool thing about Drizzle. We get this UI that we can see that we don't actually have any records as of now, but everything seems to be working fine. We have all of the columns that we created and no records. Now, since our database is working as expected, we can start working on the routes. And in order to do that, I'll just create a new folder in here, and I'll call this routes. And inside our routes, since we have our posts, I'll just create another one called posts. And setting up all of the routes, I'll just do this in an index.ts. So I'll do file index.ts. This is pretty straightforward. I'll do import router from Express. We don't have the handlers set up, but I'll still import them. So I'll do import the handlers from our handlers file. We'll work on this file next, but for now, let's just set up our router. I'll do export const router is equal to router, and we'll have about 5 routes in here. We'll do router.get, and this is on the slash path, and it'll be handled by get post. I'll just duplicate this 5 times, so we have 5 here. This will be another get, but instead now this will be passing in an ID, and it'll get an individual post. So we'll do get post. We'll have a post, and this creates the post. We'll have a patch, and this updates the post. And we'll have a delete, which deletes the post. And for the update, we actually also have to provide the ID, so I'll pass that in there. Next, we can work on the handlers file, so I'll do file handlers.ts. Let's import some of the things that we'll use, so we'll do import request from Express, and we also want to import response. Down here, let's also import DB, and this is the one that we created. And let's also import some things from our schema, so we'll do new post. We'll also import post and the posts. These two are just types, and this is actually for using the table in our queries. For getting a post, we'll do export async function get post. This gets the request, which is just a request type, and then the response, which is a response, and it returns a promise, which is resolving to a response. And here, we'll do this for all of them. I'll have a try catch, so we'll do try, and then for the catch, we just console log the error, and then if anything, we just return a status of 500 with the message that an error was encountered. This error message can definitely be improved on, but I'll leave that to you guys. Now we can grab the ID from the parameters, so we'll do request.params. Now there's a couple ways of doing this next part using Drizzle. The first way is doing the SQL-like way of doing things, as I showed you at the beginning of the video. So we'll do const posts is an array of posts, and we'll do await db.select. So we'll do a select from posts and in order to do a comparison in Drizzle, we actually have to import EQ, and this basically just does an equality comparison. So we'll import this from Drizzle ORM, and in here we'll just do posts.id and compare this to ID. Oh, you'll notice that we have an error here. This is just because we called this post, so I'll do all posts. The tricky thing about using this way of doing things is that no matter if one record is found or multiple records, it will always return an array. So next we actually have to do if all posts dot length is less than 1. So if we didn't find any posts, then we'll just return a response with the status of 404, and we'll send a message saying that the post was not found. After this, we just have to return a response and send the post, which is just all posts and index 0. So this is the first way of doing things. When it comes to finding just one post and it's just a simple comparison by ID, I actually prefer doing this using the queries API. So let's look at how to do that. First, we'll just do const post, and in here we'll do await, call db again, and instead use query this time, and we'll do posts, and we'll do a find first. All we have to do in here is just pass the condition. So we'll do where EQ, so we'll use EQ again, posts.id, and provide the ID. This is where I was saying if you're more familiar with something like Prisma, this structure of doing things is actually a lot more familiar. Now in here, we'll do if not post. We'll do the same thing. So we'll do return response.status with a 404, and then send the message of post not found. And if the post was found, we'll just return response.send post. But yeah, when it actually comes to finding things, I prefer this method. I find it a lot cleaner and easier to understand, but there's nothing wrong with using the other method. Now let's look at getting all the posts. So we'll do export async function, get posts, and the parameters are the same. So I'll just copy and paste that, and so is the response. I'm a bit lazy, so we'll do the same try catch in here. So try catch, I just copy and paste that. So now all we have to do here is just const all posts, and this is an array of posts. So we'll do post array and await db.query.posts, and we'll do a find many this time. If you wanted to use the other method, all you would have to do in here, so you would delete this part and do select and from posts. And that's it. These two lines are basically the same thing. But now since we have all of our posts, we can just do return response.send and return the posts. We can now look at creating a post. So I'll just copy and paste this. This is just a function of creating a post, same parameters, same response. And in here, the same try catch. And we'll take the parameters from the body. So we'll do const title and content. And this is equal request.body. We'll worry about the validation on these later, but for now, we'll just do const results. And results is actually going to be an array of new posts. So we'll do new post array. And in order to create a post using Drizzle, all we have to do is just await db.insert. And we'll do an insert into the posts table with the values of title and content. And the other thing you want to make sure you do with Drizzle is that at the end, you want to do dot returning. Otherwise, doing this part, we'll just insert it into the table without actually returning it to us. So since we want that, we'll just put it in there. Next, I'll just add a check for the results. So if not results or the length is less than 1, we'll just return a message saying that the post could not be created. Otherwise, we just want to do return response.send and the results at index 0. Now that we have our create, let's look at how to do an update. So I'll put it here. We'll do an update. And in here, it's the same thing with the try and catch. And we'll just grab our values, which we have ID from the request parameters and the title and the content from the request.body. An update is also pretty straightforward. We'll do const updated post. And this also returns an array. So we'll do post array is equal to await db. And I'll actually put this on a new line so it's more readable. And we'll do update. We'll update the posts table and we'll set the values of the title and the content to the ones that were provided in the request. And we also need a where clause in here. So we'll do a where. And again, eq posts.id is equal to ID. And we also need the returning. Now we can just throw a condition in here to check for if the post was updated. If the post wasn't updated, we can just post could not be found. This looks wrong, so we'll just do post could not be updated. Lastly, we just do return response.send updated posts and at index 0. The last handler that we have is the delete post. So in here, we'll get the ID, and I put the ID in the request body. This is up to you if you want to have it in the URL or the request body, but I just put it in the body. So we'll do request.body, and we'll do const deleted posts is equal to await db, and we'll do a delete on the posts table where we have the ID of the post. So we'll do post.id is equal to ID. And in this scenario, I actually want to be more specific with what's being returned. So we'll do dot returning, and we can actually provide the values that we want returned. So I'll do ID is posts.id. In this case, when we get the list of posts that were deleted, all we have for each post is the ID of the posts that were deleted. And just like the other ones, we'll throw a condition in here for if the post could not be found. Otherwise, we just return the deleted post. So that's it for all of our handlers. We can actually go in this index.ts file and see that all the errors are now gone. All we have left to do is just connecting this router to the rest of the application. So we'll go into our application index.ts. We'll delete this route since we don't need it anymore. And at the top of the file, I'll just do another import. So we'll import router as posts router. And this is coming from that router that we created. So .routes/posts. Now in here, I want to prefix my API by doing /API. So I'll do const API prefix is equal to /API. And now we can do app.use. And for the route, I'll do a string. So I'll do API prefix /posts. And this is where all of our posts are going to live, and just passing in the post router. And that's it for all of our posts. We can now actually hit the routes for our posts. But before we do that, since this is a video on the ORM itself and not how to build an API, let's continue with adding relationships to our tables. And to do that, we'll go back to our schema. So we'll go to db schema index.ts. And the goal here is to have our posts, and each post needs to have an author. And for each author, we can grab all the posts for that author. In order to do that, we'll just do another table. So we'll do export const users is equal to pg table, and passing in here the name users. I won't make this table too complicated. We'll just have an ID, which is a UUID for the column ID. It will have a default random, and it's the primary key. And all we have for each user is just a name, which is a varchar for the column name. Also a length of 256, and we want to make sure this is not null. And that's it for our users. Now we just need the types. I'll just do the same thing that we did for the post. So we'll have a user and a new user. Now, in order to make the connection between these two, we'll have to add another import. So we'll import relations. And we can start with the post relation. And in order to do that, we'll just do export const post relations is equal to relations. And this is for the post table. The goal here is to have a one-to-many relationship where one user can have many posts, but one post can only belong to one user. So we'll do a function here where we get one, and in here we'll return an object where the author is now mapped to one, and this is for the users table. And the fields that we need from here are the posts.authorID. And we'll add that column in a second, but now we just need references, and this will reference the users.id column. Let's also add that column to the post, so we'll have author ID, and this author ID is just a UID column for author ID, and it cannot be null. So the relationship is now set up on the post side. We also need to set up the relationship on the user side. This one's a lot simpler, so we'll do export const users relations is equal to relations. And this is for the users table, where instead of getting one, now we get many, since this is a one-to-many relationship. And this returns the object where posts is mapped to many posts. And that's all we have to do in order to set up a one-to-many relationship between our posts and our users. In order to see this in action, we can actually create more routes, and this time it's for the users. So we'll go in here and create another folder, and this is for users. And this users folder will do the same thing where we have an index.ts, and in this file we just set up the router. The router is pretty straightforward. We have our handlers again, and this time we have a route where, provided the user ID, we get all the posts for that user. And in order to create a user, we also have a post route where we just create the user. Now we can focus on the handlers, so I'll do new file handlers.ts. We'll have very similar imports to the post handlers, and in here, the create user is very similar to creating a post, so we'll just copy and paste this, and as you can see here, we have results, insert into users where the value is the name that was provided in the body, and we have the same error handling on this side as well. Where it gets a bit more fun is getting the posts for a user, so we'll do a get users posts. It's the same error handling, but instead in here, we'll grab the ID. So we'll do const ID is equal to request.params. And as we saw at the beginning of the video, we can use find first. So we'll do const user is equal to await db.query.users. And we'll do a find first where we have a where, and this is equal to users.id and the ID passed in. And in order to get the post for this user, all we have to do is just with, and in here pass posts is equal to true. Find first will handle all the joins for us, so it will join the posts on the users table. Now the same error handling, and if not, just send the user back as a response. You'll notice that the errors are now gone in here since we have all the handlers now created. All we have left to do is just go back to the app. Just like we imported the posts router, now we do users router from users. And just like we set this up, we'll do the same thing for users and passing in the users router. Great, so now we have all of our routes created and we have a new table. The one thing that we cannot forget to do though is going in here and running npm run generate. This will look at our schema file, look at what changed, and then create our migrations based on that. So we'll run this file. We'll see that it created this migration file and we can actually even look at it. This will be in the Drizzle folder and it's this new migration. We'll see that it creates a new users table. And it adds the author ID column on the post table. The one thing that I don't really like about Drizzle is that you can't provide your own custom name for the migrations. I tried looking through the documentation, but I couldn't find a way of doing that. Hopefully they add it sometime in the future, but now all we have left to do is just run npm run migrate in order to apply these changes to our database. Oh, and you'll see that I got an error here, and this is because I stopped my Docker containers. We can run the same thing. I'll run it from here, but you can just do the same command of docker compose up. Now that my containers are running, I can go back to my terminal and run that command again. So npm run migrate, and all of my migrations ran. So if I go in here and I'll actually restart my Drizzle Studio. So I'll do npm run Drizzle Studio, and now we have all of our tables. I can just select all of them. I'll even go into the post table. And now we can see the author column here. Now I don't know why the users tab didn't save, but I'll go back in here, select all of them again, and go into the users table. We can see that now they have all the posts associated with that user. This is a nice feature of the studio where you can see for each individual user the posts. Now let's go back to our tester.http and just replace this with all of these new routes. You can find all of these in the description down below in the repo that I provided, or you can set all of these up using Postman, whichever one you prefer. But for now, let's just test getting all of the posts. So if I hit this, we actually get an error. And if we look at our server, we'll see that we have an error in our post handlers. And if we take a look at it, we'll go into source, routes, posts. We can even see by the underline here. So we go into handlers. We have an error in our create post. And that's because in our insert, we now need to provide an author ID, and we'll get that from the body. So we'll do author ID and also passing that in here. So that should resolve all of our errors. I can restart my Docker container. And if I go back to my tester, I can hit this again, and we'll see that we actually get an empty array. Now, in order to create a post, we have to create an author. So let's go down to the post for users and just create a user with the name CodeBrew. Looks like that was successful and it provided us with the ID for the user. We can now go up and create a new post. So we'll do a new post with the title subscribe to CodeBrew, and the content will be more content like this coming, and just providing the ID in here. And you'll see that the post was created. Now, if I take this ID for the post, we can throw this in the get. So we'll do get posts ID, and we'll get the post that we just created. We can even go down to the patch now and provide the ID for that post in here, and we'll update the title to like the video and content helps the channel. So if we do this, we'll see that our post was updated. So now it says like the video helps the channel. Going back up to the get, if we do a get on that same post, we'll see that we get the updated post. Let's also take a look at this inside of the Drizzle Studio. So if we refresh this, now we see the new user, CodeBrew, with the posts. So if I click on this, we can see all the posts that CodeBrew created. We can even go down to the posts. We'll see that updated post. And if I click on the author, I can see the author down here. I was also looking through the documentation, and it looks like Drizzle also supports Zod, so I'll import this package, and then we can use it to validate our routes for the data coming in. So to do that, I'll go to my schema, so we'll go database, schema, index. For the posts, I can go down here. Since we already installed this package at the beginning of the video, we can just do export, const insert, post schema, and we can create a new insert schema. This is from Drizzle Zod, and we can provide the table post. We can now copy this, go down here, create the same thing for users. We'll do insert user schema and provide the users table. Now, if we go down to the handlers, so we'll go down to the post handlers. For the create post, we can add one more step in here. So we'll do const new post is equal to the insert post schema. We'll do a parse on here by providing the title, the content, and the author ID. This will just ensure that the values passed in match the schema of the table in the database. And now we can take this new post and just provide it in here instead of the values. We can do the same thing for updating a post. So in here, we'll do const post is equal to insert post schema. The difference here being that since we don't take an author ID in here to update the post, we actually want to do a partial here. And the only values that we want to take are the title. So we'll do title is equal to true, and then content is also equal to true. I'll put this on a new line. So these are the only two values that we want to verify for, and then we'll do a dot parse on those same values, so title and content. And now we can take this post and pass it in here for the setter. We'll just do the same thing for the users handlers. So when we create a new user, we'll go in here. So when we get the name, we'll just do const new user is equal to insert user schema. And I'm not sure why it's not importing it. I'll just manually do it. We just go in here, insert user schema. And for the schema, we'll just do a dot parse and provide the name of that user. Now with the new user, we just grab it and pass it in here. And that's all we have to do in order to use Zod for our schemas. And I can even test this by going to the patch. And for this time, I'll just exclude the title. If I run this, we'll see an error encountered. We can obviously improve on these error messages, but for now this will do. We have our validation, and we were able to use Drizzle for migrations, creating models, creating relationships. Overall, I think Drizzle is great, and if you see anything in this video that could be improved when using Drizzle, let me know down in the comments, and make sure to subscribe.